All right, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming to hear me talk a little bit about a business strategy called category design. My name is John Ruggi. I am the VP of Marketing Strategy at Bombam, and I also help other companies with category design through my consultancy called Flag and Frontier. I'm based in beautiful Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I live with my lovely wife and 4 daughters. We have been married for 17 years, and if you know me at all, you know that I love all things outdoors. So hiking, biking, skiing, you name it. So I'm excited to talk to you about category design today because it's a path that many people are not familiar with, but it's one that can greatly improve your outcomes when applied in the right way. So now my goal today is not to give you a step-by-step plan for executing the strategy. We're not going to have time for that. I really just want to give you a preview of what this approach looks like so you can decide if it's something that you want to explore further. So to set the stage for our discussion, I want to share a very simple quote. It's from Mike Volpe, who was the founding CMO at Hubspot. Now, Mike said, there are basically 2 business models. You can carve out a niche in an existing category, or you can create a new category. So what does Mike mean when he says create a new category? Well, this is what we're talking about. The first thing that I want to share about category design is that it's a strategy that helps you define the terms of competition in your favor. So what that means is that you're stepping outside the confines of an existing category and you're creating a new space that you can own and dominate. So if category designers were an army, they wouldn't be focusing on pushing back on the front lines against the enemy. Instead, they'd be exploring new territory that they could own and occupy themselves. So category design is much more than a marketing strategy. It's actually a business strategy that guides your marketing, your product, your sales efforts, and the way that you plan for growth. Now that might sound a little bit abstract, so I want to share a few examples of companies that have employed category design thinking, at least in the B2B software space. The first example I want to share is Salesforce. You might know them as a CRM company, but what Salesforce really did was step outside the bounds of on-premise software and built the modern software as a service model. I'll mention Gong next. They've redefined the way organizations measure and track their ability to generate revenue with what they're calling the revenue intelligence category. Terminus, of course, they changed the way we think about demand generation when they introduced account-based marketing. And then finally, Hubspot, an example that I'll talk a little bit more about later. They made pure outbound efforts look outdated with their inbound approach to marketing and sales. Now, there's many companies practicing category design thinking today. You don't have to be a publicly traded company or have VC funding to employ category design thinking. These are just a few high-profile examples. So in a moment, we're going to go into more detail about what the category design process looks like. But before we do, I want to share some background on where category design came from in the first place. It's not something that I came up with myself. I have had the chance to practice it, but the credit to coming up with this idea and this process goes to a few folks. First of all, years ago, books like Positioning and the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, Crossing the Chasm, and the Innovator's Dilemma, they taught us that you have to be very intentional about the way that you position new ideas. And they also taught us that new innovations, especially breakthrough innovations, they rarely gain success early on as better versions of their predecessors, but they gain success when they're applied to different problems altogether. So Al Ries and Jack Trout, they summed it up best when they said, the basic issue is not convincing prospects that you have a better product or service. The basic issue is creating a category that you can be first in. So that was all great thinking that laid the groundwork for this idea of creating a category. But it wasn't until 2016 when the first real book about category design was published. It's called Play Bigger, and it was written by Christopher Lochhead, Kevin Maney, Al Ramadan, and Dave Peterson. And this book really lays out the entire blueprint for the category design process. So if this is something you want to explore further, it's definitely required reading to get started. All right, so you might be, now that you know a little bit about where this process came from, you might be asking yourself, why does this strategy even matter? why would you want to invest in developing a new space when you could just pursue that niche positioning strategy instead? Well, I want to share 3 reasons with you. The first is that competing for a sustainable position within a market niche, that's getting harder and harder every year. It used to be that companies had maybe about 5 competitors. Today, they have about 14 on average. Some places are far more crowded than that. On top of that, as the costs of creating a company come down and VC funding becomes more plentiful, it means that categories can become crowded very, very quickly. So if you're in the MarTech space, you know exactly what I mean. You've probably seen this graphic before. Even when you look at the smallest subsectors of marketing technology, there's dozens or maybe even hundreds of companies within each of those niches. Now, you can take a look outside of MarTech and see the same trend. These are just a few categories that I grabbed from G2, ERP, cloud infrastructure monitoring, a few others. And you can see that really in any given space, there's dozens, if not hundreds of competitors competing for market share there. Second reason I want to share is that trying to position your category, trying to position your product into an existing category, that can actually work against you. Here's what I mean by that. The thing you need to know about categories is that buyers use categories as a way of making sense of a complex world. None of us have the time to evaluate each product on its own merits. So we use categories as kind of a shortcut for navigating this complex environment. Now, many of you, though, you've probably built something that solves a new problem, or maybe it solves an existing problem in an entirely new way. And if that's the case, what you've built is unlikely to fit within the existing categories that buyers are familiar with. So if that describes you, trying to position yourself in an existing category is going to cause confusion among your buyers. The same is true if you just decide not to define your category at all. So what's going to happen is buyers will evaluate you on the wrong criteria. And if you lack the way to create the right narrative around what you do and show buyers how you fit into the world, then you're going to be stuck spending in just an inordinate amount of time trying to describe to people what you actually do. Category design, though, gives you a way out of that predicament. All right, the third reason has to do with outcomes. So category design, when it's executed well and applied in the right situations, can actually yield outsized returns. I want to share with you this research that was published in Harvard Business Review. The researchers found that among Fortune's list of 100 fastest growing companies, just 13 of them were investing in category design. This is between 2009 and 2011. However, of those 13%, they captured more than 50% of the increase in profits among the Fortune 100 and 74% of the increase in market cap. All right, I've got one bonus reason for you, and it's fun. In my opinion, I just think it's more fun to build something different, to solve new problems and create new approaches than it is to try to outdo your competitors on hand-to-hand combat over features or price or just pure sales and marketing effort. But I will let you be the judge of that one. All right, so if you're open to this idea that category design thinking might be something you want to explore, you're probably wondering at this point how category design works. So in my experience, the easiest way to show you that is to contrast a traditional niche positioning strategy with a category design strategy. So to keep things simple for today, we're just going to focus on 6 of the ways that category design differs in its approach from a niche positioning play. All right, first we're going to talk about where demand comes from. Now, in a niche approach, when you're in an existing category, you're competing with existing demand for that category. So what that typically means is that buyers are aware of that category. They often have a line item in their budget for it, and they're out there searching for the best solution for them. And that's why in a niche play, most of your efforts are going to be focused on demand capture. Now, in a category design situation, that's kind of reversed. Those circumstances I just described don't apply. Buyers aren't aware of the category. They certainly don't have a line item in it or a line item in their budgets for it. And they're probably not out there searching for a solution yet. That's why your job is to focus mostly on creating demand for that category. So how does each of these approaches differ in capturing or creating demand? Well, again, in that niche positioning play, a lot of what you're doing to capture demand has to do with marketing your product. You're talking about why it might be the best product for a particular audience. Maybe you're the market leader, maybe you're the cheapest, but a lot of what you're talking about is marketing the product itself. Category design takes a different approach, though. There's no real point in emphasizing your product when buyers don't know why that type of product would be needed in the first place. That's why instead, category designers focus on evangelizing the problem they solve. They know that if you can get customers aware of the problem and bought into the idea that there's a need to solve it, you will naturally increase interest in the solution. Now, because category designers are focused on selling the problem, they have to take a different approach with their advertising and their marketing. So while a niche player might advertise points of differentiation, like why they serve a particular market, maybe a special feature they built, maybe why they're faster or more reliable than something else, category designers instead focus on something bigger. They focus on something called your point of view, which is a term that came out of Play Bigger. Now, the point of view is an opinion. It's a view about how the world is changing and why a new category of solutions is needed to help people succeed in this new world. So it goes beyond points of differentiation and talks about why a wholly different type of solution altogether is worth exploring. Now, to expand that point of view or explain that point of view, category designers use what's called a from-to framework. This is another idea that I'm going to attribute to Christopher Lockett and Play Bigger. A from-to framework, it's a way of talking about your category such that it takes buyers from a former way of doing things to a new approach that's favorable to the buyer. So that's in contrast to niche players who tend to focus their messaging on more incremental improvements to the status quo. So two more things. Next is that the way that those messages are brought to market are different in a category design situation. Category designers have to focus on making a bigger impact to really kind of jolt people out of their way of thinking and get them to pay attention to kind of a new paradigm. So to do that, they go beyond traditional marketing campaigns and they focus on something called lightning strikes. And lightning strikes are kind of like marketing campaigns on steroids. They're designed to kind of break through the noise, get people to set up and pay attention. They're not so focused on typical metrics like lead generation, but they're more focused on getting buyers to change the way that they think about things. And I'll talk about some examples of that later on. Last thing I'll mention is co-opetition. So category designers understand that for a category to really come to life, it has to be bigger than just one company. They really need an ecosystem of investors, partners, advocates, and even competitors to help legitimize this new way of thinking. So a niche player might be focused more on capturing market share from competitors, but a category designer is more focused on the growth of the category itself. All right, so we've talked about a few ways in which these two strategies differ. Now I really want to show you what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to share 4 examples of what category design looks like from 4 different companies. We're going to start with a very well-known company that I'm sure you all have heard of, and we'll work our way down to smaller companies so you can kind of see how category design works at different stages of a company's life cycle. So as we go, I want to see if you can spot each of the 6 aspects we've talked about as I'm describing how these 4 companies executed category design. All right, we're going to start with Tesla. And I want to start with them because it's a great example of a company that came in and redesigned a category in their favor. So obviously we're talking about electric cars. This would be a good time to remind you that electric cars were actually invented about 100 years ago. Now, more recently though, in the 90s, companies like General Motors, they really tried to make a go of commercializing electric cars. But when they designed and when they marketed those cars, what kind of buyer did they have in mind? It was someone who was so environmentally focused that they were willing to make huge sacrifices when it came to performance and practicality. This is an example of one of those cars. It was basically a car that could get you from point A to point B as long as those points weren't too far apart. Now, if you think about that at the time, though, what other cars fit into that definition of a car that's really just designed to get you from point A to point B? It was economy cars, cars like Honda Civic, which, by the way, did not use that much fuel in the first place, and they were pretty cheap. So there really wasn't enough to be gained by buying one of these early electric cars unless you were a true environmental enthusiast. And they continue to be seen as something mainly built for people who are environmentally minded or economically minded. Now, that line of thinking, it was continued by the auto industry when the Prius was introduced. So electric and hybrid cars, they continued to be marketed to people who were economy minded and wanted to save money on fuel, or maybe those who are especially concerned about the environment. So when Tesla's cars were introduced, though, they could have used their new technology to market to the same type of customer. They're touting a car that was a better version of the Prius. But Tesla did something entirely different. They chose to redesign the electrified car category in its favor. They defined electric cars as being performance-oriented and pretty practical too. And the growth in their revenue and their market cap is certainly an indication of how well that's working out. Now, this is how this played out against that framework that we looked at earlier. The problem Tesla solves is that electric cars were sacrificing performance and practicality. They took the point of view that electric cars, they shouldn't be niche products. They should be products for everyone. They took the world from a place where having an electric car meant you had to make huge sacrifices when it came to performance, desirability, practicality, and to a place where electric cars meant you could have the best performance and practicality. Now, you're probably wondering why I shared that picture of the Cybertruck with a broken glass earlier. And that's because it's a great example of a lightning strike. I am 99.9% certain that Tesla broke that glass on purpose, because what better way to get press coverage than a product launch where something goes wrong? And by the way, when was the last time you ever bought a car based on the strength of its glass? If that was really a concern for you, you could probably convince yourself that Tesla could fix that issue pretty easily. Now, we talked about competition, and Tesla did that in a big way by releasing the patents of its battery technology so that the electric car category could grow, even faster. And finally, they did some other things to shape the category. They like their direct-to-consumer distribution network. They've foregone the dealer network, and they've also foregone model year updates in favor of continuous improvement. We also know about their autonomous driving developments as well. All right, we're going to shift gears to the B2B space, and we're going to talk first about Hubspot. Now, as you know, Hubspot is the leader, category king of inbound marketing software. Now, inbound, it's a common term today, but that's only because Hubspot willed it into existence through its product and marketing. So here's the background. When Hubspot came to life in the early 2000s, what's known today as outbound marketing was really just called marketing at the time. So I'm talking about cold emails, prospecting emails, display ads, other lead gen tactics where sellers are reaching out and often interrupting buyers. And that's what most marketing automation software at the time, like Eloqua and Pardot, was designed to do. Now, Hubspot, as you know, they built software that was designed to attract buyers through content marketing, SEO, social media, and brand marketing. So their product did some of the same things that traditional marketing automation software did, but they built it with a different philosophy, this inbound philosophy in mind. Now, at the time, HubSpot's founders, this is Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah, they had two choices. The first choice they had was they could have tried to compare themselves directly to the Eloquas and the Pardots of the world. And they could have tried to make this claim that HubSpot had a quote unquote better marketing automation platform. Now, if they had tried that, though, that would have been a very tough road to go down. Those other companies already had a leading market position, and trying to convince people that you have a better product when there's an established marketing leader is very difficult to do. Now, the other option they had at their disposal was to reframe the way they describe themselves. So instead of having conversations about who was better, they'd be having conversations about how they were different. In other words, they'd be forcing a choice. They could ask buyers, Do you believe that this traditional outbound approach is the way of the future? Or do you believe that it's better to attract buyers to your business? So this is how that played out for them. The problem HubSpot's buyer space was that outbound was no longer effective on its own. Buyers they don't want to be interrupted all the time. Their point of view, and that inbound approach is more effective than a purely outbound one. They took the customers from a place where they were doing interruption-based outbound marketing to a place where their buyers or where their marketers could attract buyers to them instead. So to get that out there, they released a book. It's called Inbound Marketing. Many of you have probably read it. And they actually started the annual Inbound event. Now, they could have named that event the HubSpot User Conference, but instead they believe that evangelizing the category was more important. So they called it the Inbound event instead. Finally, HubSpot, they weren't so much focused on competition. They were mostly focused on teaching the marketing community how to do inbound. And so they extended those efforts with a partner network of HubSpot certified agencies and consultants. All right, now we're going to go over an example of a company that's been around for a few years, but is early on in its category design journey. So as I mentioned before, I actually work for Bombam. I just joined them last year to help them design and implement a category design plan. So for some background, we were the first company to commercialize something called asynchronous video. That's just a fancy way of saying video that you can record and then send to someone over email, social media, Slack, or other mediums. So the challenge that we've run into, though, is that our prospects do not know about video messaging. They don't know what it's for. They don't know why they should use it. And so it's not on the radar at scale, not yet anyway. So what we needed to change that, though, was a way to evangelize our solution and a way to evangelize the problem we solve. And we found that the category design process was a perfect way to do that. So after spending some time talking with our customers, we found that they used our software because as salespeople, most of them were having trouble building relationships as quickly and effectively as they wanted to at scale. Now, the problem, though, it was not with the sales people themselves. They were not doing anything wrong. The problem is what is with what their customers are experiencing, the people that they are trying to reach out to. And the inboxes of their prospects and their customers, they're filled with spam. They're filled with CC threads that never die, just irrelevant messages from people they've never heard of, and newsletters that they've probably unsubscribed from 3 times already. And the problem is that when you're trying to connect with someone, when you're trying to build a relationship with someone, it is so easy to be mistrusted, ignored, overlooked, or just plain forgotten when there is so much noise in your recipient's inbox. So we call that noise digital pollution. These are some illustrations we did to help illustrate that problem. And we know that digital pollution turns people into skeptics about anyone who's trying to communicate and build a relationship with them. That's the real problem we're trying to solve. So with that lens, we're developing a new category. It's something that can include video, but it's something that's much bigger than just a communications medium. We call it human-centered communication. And it's both a philosophy about selling and about building relationships, and it's a set of technologies that helps you break through digital pollution and be seen, heard, and understood. So here's how those 6 aspects of category design are playing out for us. First, again, the problem. The problem we're looking at is that digital pollution, it prevents people from connecting with each other. Our point of view, it's based around this idea that a human-centered approach is more effective at building relationships than an overly automated or a kind of mass communications approach. So what that means is we're taking our customers from a place where they're ignored and often forgotten to a place where they are seen, heard, and understood. Now, to get this message out there, we're actually taking some notes from HubSpot's playbook. We're launching a book this fall that I just showed you. It's called HumanCentered Communication. And we're also launching a film series in Q4 about the challenges of digital pollution and why it's such a pressing problem for business people, especially salespeople. We're also we're working with others who are interested in evangelizing this approach, even though sometimes they're aligned with some of our competitors. And we're also taking things a step further by really investing in coaching and training about this approach. So finally, I want to talk about our fourth example. It's an early stage startup company, because I want to show you how category design thinking can be applied, whether you're a public company or whether you're just getting started. The company we're going to talk about is called Update AI. They're a software company that's helping customer success professionals be more successful relationship builders. Now, they're also a company I've consulted for, so I was lucky enough to be involved early on in their category design conversations. So here's the thing you need to know about the customer success space, in case that's not where you're from. Today, business leaders do not see CS just as a way of fighting churn. They are looking to CS as a revenue center. They also know that in order to drive more revenue from their customers, CS professionals have to be much more strategic about developing customer champions. That's a term that they use in this space, customer champions. So Update AI has built software designed to do just that. It automates many of the mundane tasks that CS professionals have to deal with. Also, they can free up time to focus on developing those customer champions. Here's the challenge that AI had been facing, though. The customer success space, it's already pretty crowded. And so trying to position Update AI as a better version of customer success, it wouldn't just be incorrect. It would cause confusion among buyers and just keep them from winning deals. So instead, Update AI used category design thinking to define a new category that they're calling champion development. It removes them from the customer success space and places them in new territory. Here's what their point of view looks like. If you ever want to see a point of view written out, this is what one looks like in real life. And here's how their category design framework is shaping up. Problem they solve: CS teams are overloaded with tasks. Their point of view is that CS teams should not be just about fighting churn. It's that they need to help develop customer champions instead. So they're taking their customers from a place where CS is just trying to keep their heads above water when it comes to task management, to a place where they are freed up to focus on developing customer champions. Now, Update AI is very early on in this process. So if you want to see how things like lightning strikes, competition, and other ways of shaping the category play out, follow this company, because that should be a really interesting story. Now, we just got a couple minutes left, but hopefully this gives you a taste of what category design is and how it works. We just had time to scratch the surface today, so I want to leave you with a few resources you can explore if you want to learn more. First, like I mentioned before, I highly recommend reading Play Bigger. This is the first book that really blueprints the category design process, and it'll give you a much broader view of what it involves. You should also check out the Category Pirates newsletter. It's written by Christopher Lockhead. He's one of the co-authors of Play Bigger, and a couple other really smart guys contribute to that as well. Next, my friends Mike Damp and Kevin Maney run a consultancy called Category Design Advisors, and they've got some great resources on the topic as well. You can check them out. I've got their website listed there. Kevin, by the way, he's one of the co-authors of Play Bigger. And then finally, I wrote a short book myself called The Newcomers Guide to Category Design. And I wrote it for someone who has never done this before and wants to know how category design works, specifically how you get started talking about this with your team and all the kind of internal workings about how to execute this. It's got advice from over 30 category design practitioners. It's content you won't get anywhere else, and you can get it for free. Just go to flagandfrontier.com/guide, and you can download a PDF or an EPUB version there. While you're there, you can also subscribe to my category design newsletter, which I publish about once a month. And finally, if you want to connect directly, here are my emails and my LinkedIn. It's been a real pleasure talking with you about category design today. I know we don't have time for a lot of extra questions. I see there's a few in the chat that I didn't get to. But again, send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help you in any way that I can.